Hello, everybody. It is Saturday, February the 8th, 2025. Alfred Hitchcock famously said that for him, the cinema is not a slice of life, but a piece of cake. And according to my friend Keith Tear today, his weekly That Was the Week newsletter, Politics and Economics, Two Worlds Collide, this week has been rather like a piece of cake. Is that fair, Keith?
Yeah, well, I'm depicting the layers that make up society. And at the bottom of everything is economics. Obviously, economics drives human experience because without value and growth, there's nothing. But, politics sits on top of that. And that's where fights happen. And if the fights don't get resolved, you end up with wars. But as long as everything's stable, you get society and life. And this week, what we've seen is the breakdown of politics, and it beginning to impact society and life to the point where we're living in what you might think of as hysterical times.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the hysteria, the paranoia is obvious. Although Richard Hofstadter wrote a famous essay about that many years ago, so it's not new. I do want to question you. Firstly, it's a terrible photo, Keith. And why is it just Asian businessman with this cake?
I don't know, Grok decided to serve me up Asian businessman. Who knows?
So your piece of cake is an Asian piece of cake. So that's, I'm sure someone will start complaining about the anti-Asian or pro-Asian bias of Grok. But your argument that economics is the base of a cake, you take as given. I'm not sure everyone would necessarily agree with that.
Well, it deserves discussion. I mean, economics to me is, not a thing separate from human existence. Economics is the word to describe how we manage our lives through a division of labor, through exchange and trade.
There's the old Marxist in Keith creeping out.
Well, it's not
in terms of layers. Then for him, economics is the foundation. Although some people would say we're a little less rational than that.
Well, economics isn't rational. It's the end product of a lot of behavior, and much of that behavior isn't rational. So economics isn't rational, but it is capturable in numbers and therefore can be thought of somewhat scientifically. That's why we have social science, not just sociology. And I do think that we're living at a time where government spending, which is the big discussion of the week, and Musk as the kind of solution.
Who's Musk? I never heard of that guy.
The assumed solution provider, the Department of Government Efficiency,
Mr. Doge.
Yeah. So really, most of the fights are happening around what should we spend and how much.
Right. So we're going to get to that. But your editorial this week, Keith, I thought was interesting. You note at the end, in conclusion, that you're in favor of Doge, but you also confess, and I'm not sure this is worthy of a confession, you say, I have emotional reactions also. I think we should try hard to rise above them. Why should we rise above our emotional reactions? Are you suggesting that the higher up you get in the cake, the more emotion there is, and at the foundation, this economic foundation, the superstructural level or the operating system of life is beyond emotion?
Not really. I'm making a slightly different point. You're close to the point I'm making, but it's different. What I'm saying is that if the economic structure is not working, what happens is that is experienced in the layers above, and the hysteria at the social layer today is symptomatic of an underlying economic problem that we experience through our emotions. And I think almost everything Trump does is channeling emotion. both on a daily basis, but also, bigger picture, why did he get elected twice? It's channeling emotion, and the emotions are valid. They're not wrong.
Yeah, you start the editorial this week. Most of us experience the world through individual events. This week, it feels to me as if the entire world is in react mode. Do you think that being in react mode is where Trump wants us to be? If we can rise above this endless reaction to everything he's throwing out, it seems almost on an hourly basis, that we need to stop reacting. Is that the key?
I think you can't stop reacting. I think Trump is in react mode, but he has.
Well, I mean, he's not so much in react mode. He is the driver of this react mode. I mean, he does something. He X's. He says something. And then we all react either positively or negatively.
Well, he's also doing it. Actually, it's both things are true. He's also reacting, but every now and then he has a glimmer of clarity, and usually we don't agree with him, but things like, the idea that NATO doesn't make sense anymore, to me, is a glimmer of reality. I kind of agree with that somewhat, that the century we're in, doesn't really need military structures that were built at the end of World War II. When he says things like, the government is spending too much money and we've got to balance the budget, that isn't reactive, and it's kind of correct. It's more or less right. So he goes from react mode, like when he said America should take over Gaza. I think he was reacting to his meeting with Netanyahu, but he also has glimmers of clarity, but we don't. Most of the population.
Although some people would say it's like a stopped clock. I mean, even a stopped clock is correct twice a day.
No, I think he's better than that. I mean, I don't think he's a stop clock. I think he's not old school. He doesn't really take received wisdom and just take it for granted as being correct. He questions things, which is not a terrible attribute, by the way.
So a lot of people are going to be thinking, why are we talking about Trump and politics and economics? Is supposed to be a tech show. There is, of course, the Doge element and our old friend Elon Musk. What's Musk and Doge got to do with this? Is this central for this week, Keith? Is it dominating the news? And is this in some ways more of a tech story than a politics or economic story?
Well, it's really an American story, but it's got a tech subplot. The tech subplot, obviously, is that Musk, who everyone is accusing of being an unelected kind of baron, forgetting that he's working for Trump and Trump was elected. And so what Musk is doing is entirely democratic. Even if you object to it, it's not undemocratic. And Congress isn't stopping him. They would have the power to, but they're not.
I'm not sure if that's the right word, maybe constitutional as opposed or legal as opposed to democratic.
I don't think we know if it's constitutional, because I think that fight still has to be fought. And there is certainly a case that it isn't. But at least until somebody fights that fight, he's acting under the authority of an elected president. So it's pretty hard to say that he's some kind of renegade. And of course, people don't like what he's doing. That's the hysteria.
Well, no, some people admire it. I mean, my understanding, and this is what makes it a tech story, is that he's replaying the X model that he used when he acquired Twitter, fired whatever it was, 80% of the people, came in like a maniac, threw a lot of stuff at the wall. Some of it stuck, some didn't. Is that a fair analysis? Was Twitter for Musk a dry run for Doge?
There's certainly a lot of similarities. You're right, Andrew. It's interesting. This week it was announced that Twitter is now very profitable, and the debt holders were able to sell the debt this week for 97 cents on the dollar, which is close to being made whole. And so Twitter, despite all the turmoil, is now thriving.
Although some people might say that profitability is a reflection of politics, but that's another story.
Well, they're correlated. Nothing is separate, is it? Everything's interrelated. It's trying to figure out, as they say in AI, what the weights are. What are the key variables making things happen?
Yeah, and coming back to layers, I like your metaphor of layers that you use for this week's newsletter. I mean, what Musk did at Twitter, for better or worse, was get rid of the layers.
He did.
I mean, he basically came in and destroyed the cake, didn't he, at X?
Yeah. There's a good example this morning. The NIH announced that it's cutting research spending to Harvard and Yale and Johns Hopkins. It's reducing the administrative overhead allowed for research from 69% down to 15%. So exactly what you said, cutting out layers.
I mean, I'm not saying I approve. I'm just saying that that's the appropriate metaphor, at least in his mind.
And there was you'll see when we get to tweet of the week or post of the week. Musk is pretty confident that he's going to deliver historical savings without negatively impacting government services.
Well, he said it in 4 words. One wonders whether he's. So Keith and you and I don't agree on this. You're in favor of all this. You at the bottom, then you say, I am in favor of Doge.
I thought I had to say that because
you didn't have to. You could have said you were against it. Why are you in favor of it?
I'm in favor of modernizing government and making it be able to deliver services better and cheaper.
Well, no one would argue with that, but that doesn't mean that you have to be in favor of Doge.
That's what Doge's job is. I mean, they don't have any other job. So you kind of have to be in favor of it. Now, I think I say that despite, on any given particular thing, I may have misgivings, but I don't have misgivings about the existence of Doge and its goal to cut government spending. And I would highly expect most of those savings come from either bureaucracy being let go or programs being defunded. That doesn't seem.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to it's like arguing against apple pie, speaking of cakes and pies. I mean, no one's against excessive government spending, but that's a completely different thing from saying you're in favor of Doge, which has gone about cutting government spending in an incredibly aggressive and controversial way. So you approve, for example, of essentially the elimination of the USAID institution.
Well, I'm not convinced it's going away, and I don't know enough about individual programs.
Well, but you do say, Keith, in the editorial, you say, so the real issue becomes whether USAID is misusing taxpayer cash, which it clearly is. I'm no expert, but nor are you. I mean, nobody really quite knows. I mean, you can always find some misuse by some government agency of a few $100, but there's no proof one way or the other at the moment, is there? Any more than any other government agency.
Yeah. Well, some of the stories coming out, Andrew, and I don't want to give them credibility because I don't know if they're true yet, but if they are true, they're very concerning. For example, how much of the money going to Ukraine has disappeared?
Yeah, I don't know. There was a big story about Politico, which seemed, to me at least, misrepresented. You didn't put this link in the newsletter, but I was particularly taken by Nicholas Christoph's op-ed. It's one of the best op-ed, if not certainly on this issue, the best op-ed writer around, with the title, The World's Richest Men Take on the World's Poorest Children. I mean, whether or not there's some truth to the fact that USAID is misusing some funds, it's a shocking headline, and it's one that has some degree of truth in, because these are the world's richest men and they are taking on the world's poorest children, and those children have no control over these funds.
I think if Musk was answering, he'd say that some of the poorest children in the world live in the United States, mainly in suburbs. They're mainly non-white.
I doubt he would say that, but
and his targets. For example, there's a pretty good chance the Department of Education, the federal one, gets closed down because U.S. education is not a federal service; it's local, and the money going into local schools. I don't think Musk is on fighting poor children mission. So that headline to me is just a very, very cheap shot. It's more symbolic of the hysteria of the moment that he wrote that.
I don't agree. I don't think it's a cheap shot, especially coming from Christoph, because he knows his stuff as well as anyone. And secondly, the problem with what Musk is doing, even if in some of it may be well-intentioned, is it lends itself to this kind of headline. So it is terrible PR. At least for America and the rest of the world. Maybe he has a domestic constituency that likes these kind of headlines. I don't know.
I think he would think of it as good PR. His whole point is America is wasting money on non-Americans.
Yeah, right? And that's that you've summarized it. And what shocks me is for you as an internationalist, you seem to approve of that.
I'm not really speaking the Keith Tier view of the world here. The Keith Tier view of the world is a post-nation state world, but we live in nation states, and it isn't unreasonable that a nation state wants to manage its budgets. That's not unreasonable. And
well, no one would argue with that. Anyway, well, I mean, this isn't a politics show. You and I disagree on this. I don't know if I'm against Doge, but I'm certainly against some of the stuff they've been doing. And you're clearly more sympathetic. Let's move on to the news of the week. One of the interesting stories is Daniel Penny, the guy who was involved in the subway chokehold death of Jordan Neely, has been hired by Andreessen Horowitz. Is there an intention here just to upset or shock people here? Why are they doing this?
I think there's an intellectual war going on that hire is symbolic of, which is to turn the tide against what Andreessen calls wokeness, by siding with people who are prepared to defend a lifestyle that is the opposite of wokeness. And
so you approve of that, because you always are going on and on about woke. I don't even know what wokeness is. It never seems to bother me, but it bothers you.
I find it sickening. It doesn't just bother me. I think wokeness is sickening because it's pretending to fight racism and sexism and not actually doing it.
Well, that's we're not going to get. I'm not going to get drawn into that one, but it doesn't reflect well, Keith, does it? I mean, maybe it does for some people, but hiring a guy who...
Well, let's just say what the guy did, just in case there are people that don't know. He was on a metro in New York, and somebody was being certainly objectionable, I think violent towards other passengers. And this guy intervened and a bit like George Floyd, held the guy in a stranglehold. The guy ended up dying. The courts found him not guilty of homicide, and he's become somewhat of a celebrity because...
Right. I mean, it's as if the George Floyd killer, I can't remember his name, if he had got off, do you think Andreessen Horowitz would have hired him?
Yeah, but George Floyd wasn't threatening anyone. So the killer was the aggressor. In this case, the person who died was the aggressor. And so it's a bit different. And the guy is a bit of a hero. Now,
well, he's a bit of a hero for some of us, for some people. I'm not sure for everybody. He is a former military guy, wasn't he? A naval officer.
I believe that's true.
But even so, I mean, is he qualified to work at Andreessen Horowitz, the top VC in Silicon Valley? I mean, what skills does he have?
Well, that is a little bit weird, Andrew. But remember, Andreessen has raised $8 billion at 2% a year in fees. They have an unlimited amount of capital, and making a hire like this to make a statement is a small cost for them. And Andreessen clearly is pulling strings in DC way more than any of us realize.
Yeah, and he doesn't. He's the anti-Musk. He doesn't want anyone to know about it. So on the one hand, we got Andreessen doing their own sort of diversity hire, hiring people who killed people on metro trains in New York and got off. On the other hand, we've got this week Google ending its diversity hiring. So the zeitgeist has changed dramatically, Keith, hasn't it? Maybe Daniel Penny should apply for a job at Google.
And after we went to press, Andrew, Amazon also announced that they've taken all the diversity language out of their corporate manual.
Yeah, I mean, if Harvey Weinstein or Jeffrey Epstein, if they weren't either departed or in jail, I'm sure they could get a job now at Google or Amazon, couldn't they?
But you're right about the zeitgeist. That's kind of what this week is all about. The zeitgeist has changed. It's okay to be male again. It's okay to...
Well, it was okay to be male before. I'm a male. I've never had a problem with it.
You know what I'm saying.
I don't know what you're saying. What are you saying?
Well, if you don't know, it's fine. You must have been living in the closet for the last 5 years. But
you sound like a parent now. If you don't know, it's fine. If you do know, it's fine.
But the whole zeitgeist is shifting to a more assertive, pro-American, stand up and be counted. Let's stop the BS on spending, and that is a night and day change. Now,
I agree with that. Although that's being pro-American isn't necessarily against diversity, is it?
Well, let's just put diversity down and bring it back in a second. Let me just say one more point first. It definitely is the case that the reaction against all of this doesn't understand that it's popular. This stuff that Musk and Trump is doing is popular. And the reaction is a throwback to the reasons the Democrats lost the election. They're trying to defend the territory that's just been defeated. And by doing so, shrinking into an even smaller minority in society. And that's the tragedy of it, because my core belief is we need humanism, and diversity, by the way, is clearly...
well, humanism is a meaningless word. There was one very good op-ed which you didn't include. I texted it over. You must have forgotten, by Jen Palker, who was, I think, second in command of tech under the Obama administration. She had a very good op-ed in the Times saying, this is how Democrats can counter Elon Musk. She talks about her own plans that got nixed for reforming government. So, I mean, one can believe in making government more efficient, digitalizing government, and remain a progressive. You don't have to be Muskian to believe in
that's how I'd like to think I'm one of those. By the way, I did read that. I'd already finished the newsletter, which is why
it's a very good essay, isn't it?
I agreed with almost all of it. I think she's exactly right. The Democrats, and I don't literally mean the Democratic Party, but anyone progressive should be standing on the ground of cheaper, better, modern government with services to people. And, to me, diversity is an organic development of wealth. Most wealthy societies are highly diverse, and you don't need to make special provisions for diversity if you have a healthy society, because it just happens.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to get sucked into that one, but certainly I would strongly suggest people read the Palker essay. Meanwhile, and maybe this is part of all this hysteria, something real is going on in the world rather than people arguing about diversity. It's AI, of course. You have one essay from Thomas Pueyo suggesting that this week in AI was when decades that happened. Do you think there's a connection, Keith, between all this hysteria over some stuff that a lot of it is cake-like, perhaps, in its relevance, and the fact that AI is changing and is about to really dramatically change the world in ways that we can't even imagine?
Well, that's bound to be alienating, isn't it? You literally don't know whether you're going to have a job and how long for, because it's becoming clearer and clearer that AI is going to be good enough to do lots of tasks in an automated way. And the latest is the creation of, and this is a good way of thinking of it, there's really three types of AI now. There's the large language models that we're all familiar with. Now there's reasoning AI. And this week, OpenAI launched a model called O3 Mini, which is a reasoning model. Reasoning models are different than large
Are they
language
built,
models.
though? Are the reasoning models, they're built on top of the sort of plumbing of LLMs? Are
Yeah.
they built on different plumbing?
Yeah, they need LLMs to be trained, and so you can't build reasoning models unless you have LLMs. But they're different. They do different things. They think as in they'll show you their train of thought and the conclusion. And then there are agent models. Agents not only think but act. So they can write to databases, send emails, build websites, and so on and so forth. So once you have that chain of the large language models, the reasoning models, and the ability to act, obviously you're getting very close to manipulating the real world, the digital real world for now.
But back to my question. I mean, whilst we're all hysterically, and perhaps historically arguing about Cake and Musk and Doge, something really significant is happening in the background, which may be both a cause and a consequence of the other stuff.
I think they're parallel. I don't think there's that much correlation, honestly, between them. But and I think of the two, the more important is what's going on with AI in terms of understanding how the future is going to play out. So I think they're parallel. I think some people may be aware and react to the AI stuff, but most of the reaction, I think, is in the political realm.
Yeah, and back to your cake then, your politics and economics cake. We have society on top of politics on top of economics. The base is economics. Where's AI in this? Is it?
AI is in at all levels, but it's mostly at the economic level today. I mean, the amount of money being saved by automation is already starting to kick in. You know, one would imagine that Musk would be the first to ask the question how that could impact government by making things better and cheaper, but he doesn't seem to be doing that.
Right. Well, Jen Palka does, though, and I agree strongly with her and you that's where progressives have to go rather than the hysteria over Musk and Trump.
Yeah.
One interesting piece of news this week, which proves you right and me wrong, not the first or the last time that will happen, is that Alex Kantrowitz has a piece about boom times for ChatGPT. I've always kind of written them off because I've always assumed there's too much of a circus around Altman. But clearly ChatGPT is doing very well, isn't it?
Yeah, that if you read that article alongside the Andreessen Horowitz one about the success of what they call wrappers, WRAP, not RAP, it's basically making the point that the company that owns the user interface is going to be the big winner in revenue. So just having a large language model doesn't really give you anything. That's going to become commoditized. Having the way that people interact with large language models is going to be very valuable. It's interesting because I think Perplexity ends up being more valuable in that world as well. And
you mean as an AI search engine?
Yeah, exactly.
And what does this tell us? I mean, this graph isn't particularly isn't particularly good news for Gemini or Anthropic or the other players in the game.
Yeah, I think the good players, and I'd include DeepSeek in that now, will all grow, but OpenAI is far ahead. OpenAI is more like the Google of this stage of.
Well, why are they so far ahead when you've said in the past and others have said that these products are commodified? Well, what does OpenAI have that the others don't?
It has the usable layer that we human beings actually engage with and use to do things.
More than Anthropic? I use Claude all the time. It seems very good to me.
I also use Claude, but and I think it's best at some behaviors. That said, we're in a minority, Andrew. Most people are not using Claude; they're using OpenAI, and the fact that Apple built it in is a huge boost to it. So you know,
is this going to be like in the old days where everyone used Microsoft and everyone knew it wasn't the best product?
No, I don't think so. Well, just to give you an example, you know, I use AI for coding, and I've used Claude really since I started doing it. I've always used Claude. This week I switched to OpenAI's O3 model because it's better.
Yeah. Well, the O3 model, as you say, is sort of built upon LLMs. It's a reasoning model, although you have to assume Anthropic will follow up with that. Well, it's certainly not going to be the last time we talk about AI. So, certainly even in February, let alone the rest of the year. Other interesting piece of news. The UK is ordering Apple to let it spy on users' encrypted accounts. But your interview of the week, or our interview of the week, is my interview with Ethan Zuckerman, a very distinguished internet analyst, activist, who had a piece in The Atlantic about America no longer being the home of the free internet. So it's not just the UK, it's America in particular. And Zuckerman, I really like and admire. I mean, he's very explicit in his critique of America's attempt to ban TikTok, and he also warns that this may play out also in terms of DeepSeek.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this goes back to economics and politics and society. Economics is global, politics is national and local, and society is certainly local. And what happens is when the local people at the political and societal level try to control things, they usually fail, by the way, because economics is global and technology protocols tend to also be global. Getting control is hard. And so that Apple story, Apple hasn't said yes, and it won't. And therefore...
But it's convenient, but Apple never says yes, and it's always convenient for it, isn't it?
Well, that has consequences. What the consequence will be that the UK won't have the full iCloud that Apple gives to us in America. And so when nation states require things that give them spying capabilities, and companies which are not, UK specific say no, the UK loses, and every nation will lose in the face of...
Well, UK users use. I'm not sure UK loses.
Well, it will lose because UK users today, for example, O3 is not shipped in the UK or Europe because regulatory approval is required prior to shipping. We're all using it already.
So you're a no-hold bars for big tech companies to jump into bed with their governments. Of course, one of the other pieces of news this week is that Google publicly removed its pledge not to use AI for weapons from website. This is part of the shifting zeitgeist. Is there anything any of these tech companies can do, Keith, that would outrage you? Or are you okay with all this sort of stuff now?
No, I'm actually quite critical. Just because I put it in the newsletter doesn't mean I agree with it. I don't believe, I personally don't want to do anything to support the US military in its supposed competition with other nation state militaries. And my 3 sons, I strongly would advise them never to join the armed forces. So my personal point of view, I am a globalist through and through, but I'm documenting and charting the rise of nationalism, the cooperation between tech and national interest, and it's pretty self-evident, right?
Yeah, it's astonishing that in the same week that Google, which is the quintessential, as some people might say, woke big tech company, ended diversity and removed its pledge not to use AI. It's interesting. It's been quite a week, or certainly quite a couple of months, Keith. And much more will happen over the next few weeks. Let's move on to our startup of the week, Deal. Fairly non-controversial in a controversial week. Tell us about Deal, why they're interesting.
Yeah, Deal's a fintech company, a very popular fintech company, and it just raised a massive amount of money to undermine the incumbents in banking and money flows. So it was a pretty easy choice.
Who are the incumbents? Who are they going after?
Bank of America, Wells Fargo, people like that.
Not hard. Those are, talk about dinosaurs, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And what does Deal do?
It's it basically does fintech-based banking for businesses mainly. You know, one of the big things is payment, for example.
Yeah, so according to TechCrunch, it helps businesses globally hire, manage, and pay employees. Is that, though, a bank business? Isn't that more of an HR play?
It's a middleman.
You can say middleman now, Keith. You used to have to say middlewoman.
Yeah, it's a middleman, but it controls money flows. It's not a custodial. That is to say, you don't bank with it. You know, instead of using Bank of America to pay your employees, you use Deal. So the game in fintech is to own as much of the money flow as possible without being a custodial, because in America it's hard to become a bank.
So are they UK based?
I actually don't know. Does it say they are?
I thought so, but so Deal is.
But General Catalyst is an American investor. They're the big investor.
I was going to say deal of the week, but they're startup of the week. Finally, in this new environment, he's back. Keith's heartthrob. He hasn't appeared for a while. Paul Graham is our X of the week, or I don't know what's the new term, Keith?
Our post of the week. Post
of the week. It's changed. It used to be tweet, then it went to X. Now it's post. Paul Graham wrote, Doge is unlike any other government. Doge is unlike any other government departments, then its performance can be precisely measured. I'm not sure about that, but anyway, how much smaller is the federal budget next year? If Elon can cut the budget by 5%, I'll be impressed. And Elon responded, at least 10%. I mean, isn't this a bit childish?
Well, yes, but I don't know that.
Put it mildly. I mean, there's so many other metrics involved in this that it's not simply cutting and being proud of cutting. But
well, that's my critique of Elon, which is he's so obsessed with cutting that he's not thinking about the qualitative part of government. So cheaper and better is important, not just cheaper. And
as Jen Palka reminds us.
So what Paul Graham, by the way, and Elon are not friends and have a history of.
Well, they're both sort of unlikable people, prickly characters, aren't
they? Paul Graham's not prickly, and he's definitely not on the spectrum, whereas Elon clearly is. But you know, for Elon to say he's going to cut the budget by 10%, and Paul Graham then says if that is true, it's going to be historic, and other governments will want to follow suit. I would think it's fairly easy for him to reduce the budget by 10%. I think if he's knowing him, he's rigorous, right? So he's not he's going to be thoroughgoing in saving money. And
how much? But just as a matter of interest, how much would that be if he does indeed cut it by 10%? What is the government budget at the moment?
Let's check.
Is it 2 or 3 trillion?
I'm going to check because I actually don't know in my head.
It is real time. Ask Claude.
The U.S. government budget was the deficit in 2024 was 1.83 trillion, but I don't know if the deficit and the budget are correlated in any way. They're probably not.
The budget's got to be, I would guess, around 2 trillion, 2 to 3 trillion.
6.75 trillion.
Oh, shows how much I know. So if he cut it, so if that is true and he cuts it by 10%, that's $670 billion. And that's what he's worth.
And he was originally targeting 2 trillion savings. So
we shall see. I mean, it's complicated and it's going to play out over the year. But Keith, you've made me hungry for a piece of cake. Lots of cake in our conversation today. As Hitchcock said, for me, the cinema is not a slice of life, but a piece of cake. That was the week, Keith. We will be back with more cake and other things next week. Have a great week, Keith, and we'll talk next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.